Hey y'all, so if you know anything about me, if you've been following me for any period of time, I'm a diehard Marvel fan. And when it comes to DC, I find myself consistently disappointed. Now, obviously, there are breakthrough films and things I really love that they're able to accomplish, but my biggest problem with DC for the longest time has been the obvious move to try to capitalize on Marvel's success in the family-friendly market. When DC has had success in the past, directly avoiding this. Specifically, I'm speaking about the Dark Knight trilogy, which a lot of people consider some of the greatest comic book movies of all time. But yesterday's DC Fandome got me thinking that DC might finally be moving in the right direction, and that is because of its focus on one thing: going darker and not trying to capitalize on a family-friendly market. Before we get into my reactions as a Marvel fan to a lot of this new DC Fandome reveals, go ahead and hit the subscribe button down below because yes, I am a Marvel fan, but I do love to talk about entertainment in general and give you reviews, recaps, and recommendations for all of the media across streaming, cable, broadcast, and in the theaters. So you're not going to want to miss that. In my opinion, Marvel, being owned by Disney, has done a really great job of focusing on a family-friendly brand. While, of course, there's a lot of innuendos, their characters are really funny, and some groups of characters push the boundaries of maybe like a PG and PG-13 rating, not in a really extreme way to go towards R, but in ways that, kind of has you thinking, okay, that was a little bit more risque of a joke. But DC, when they follow in this format by using similar directors or trying to balance a really dark and intense tone with this comedic genre, it hasn't worked for them. And the films I'm specifically talking about are, of course, the Justice League from 2017, as well as, to me, Aquaman. It doesn't really work. Some of those films, they feel unbalanced to me as a Marvel fan. Again, this is not an attack on DC. This is just, I genuinely think they have something in their back pocket that they should be using more, and it's the darker side of their characters. I personally tend to think of DC as a lot more brooding characters, and specifically in the cinematic versions of them, because I think DC has had really great success in the TV world, keeping it more lighthearted, going for that 18 to 35 demographic that is so highly coveted in television. I think that works really well for them. The Arrow has been so successful, The Flash, as well as Supergirl and all of their other CW shows. I think they really have a handle on that. But in movies, I feel like they're constantly missing the mark, or they'll do something really good that revives my hope in them as a movie studio, and then they'll lose it with the next film. However, DC Fandome yesterday and the reveals that they chose to show kind of revives my hope in that. It looks like, from what I can see, all of the 4 major first looks that they gave all look to be way more on the dramatic side. Obviously, I expect all of these movies to contain some element of comedy in them, because all movies probably should, but I like the fact that it's very much this darker tone. And I keep saying family friendly, but what I mean is really going deep into the lore of these characters and not shying away from the dark side of them, such as really darker villains or maybe more anti-heroes, and genuinely just giving this approach of a darker side of superheroes obviously appeals to people, but is not something that seems to be a focus for them. But let's go over the 4 biggest things and my takeaways from each of them. So the first of that being Black Adam. I think The Rock is the perfect choice for DC to pick up as a superhero. He has a natural comedic ability as an actor, and that's a lot of what his branding has been as an actor, his personal star persona. However, I think he is really going to enjoy digging into what I believe is an anti-hero type role, as well as kind of going for a darker side, because we've seen him in movies like Get Smart, not to spoil it, or in the Fast and Furious franchise, be a little bit of a morally gray character or someone who potentially starts out as a villain. But I'm interested to see how he takes on this superhero role. I mean, the man is built for a role like this. It's like he's trained his entire life for it, but I'm really interested to see what they actually pull off. And again, from the first look they do give, it's very ominous and dark and creepy, and it almost feels like the reveal of a villain in an old Disney movie, and I really like that. And I like the fact that that DC is introducing new superheroes, not ones that we've seen on screen before. I think that is a really smart strategy for them at this point in kind of what it seems like they're trying to build. I'm really interested to see this film in July when it comes out. However, going off of this, and maybe to like emphasize my point about what I mean by like not family friendly content, the Peacemaker series. Peacemaker is going to be an HBO Max original series, and it's going to follow Peacemaker from James Gunn's Suicide Squad. I think James Gunn's Suicide Squad film from this past year is really indicative of what I mean by not always being dark and brooding, but still very much positioning yourself as a superhero franchise as not necessarily being kid-friendly, because no children should watch the Suicide Squad. It is incredibly twisted humor. It's not a PG-13 movie, is what I'm trying to say. Like, it is not in any way intended for children to see. It is hilarious, and it is absolutely comedic, and there's not really too much drama about it, but it dives into darker themes with a comedic lens and allows that comedy to be a little bit more twisted than where the MCU is ever allowed to go. And I think James Gunn, as a creative, is great at this, because even within the MCU, within those family-friendly, Disney-approved guidelines, I think The Guardians has a little bit more of a risque kind of humor to it that some of the other films don't necessarily have, and that's what makes The Guardians so unique within the MCU. So Gunn obviously has a knack for this, and I'm really interested to see where this Peacemaker series goes. Before, I was kind of like, oh, that seems like interesting that they're also going to follow like the Disney Plus model of having heroes both in movies and in shows, but I'm personally really excited for this one because it just feels like it's going to be a lot of adult-focused humor that I think is going to be really hilarious and build off of what The Boys was able to establish with sometimes these superhero people aren't always altruistic in their motives. Next, the one I'm most excited about, The Flash. Now, the reason I'm most excited about this is not necessarily Ezra Miller as The Flash, although he did win me over in the Snyder Cut. I haven't always been the biggest fan of his portrayal of The Flash. Like, I definitely prefer the Flash from the television series, but I do find his character very interesting. His story with his dad, although I'm really sad Billy Crudup had to leave as his dad, because that was perfect casting in my opinion, and I'm really upset about that. But because of one man, Michael Keaton, whose voice I would know anywhere, in a dark alley, in a movie theater, walking down the street, I would recognize that man's voice anywhere. And my personal favorite Batman, although I do love the Dark Knight trilogy, is Michael Keaton. I love him in 1989 Tim Burton's Batman. I think he is a really great Bruce Wayne. You can totally disagree with me. It's just like my personal preference for the character. I really like him in that role, and so getting to see him return as Batman in this older, almost like mentor figure way, I really like. And personally, as someone who isn't like the biggest Batman fan, I really like this balance of mentor and protege, kind of the same way Tony has Peter. And again, I'm not trying to compare everything. I know that's not fair as a Marvel fan to just be like, we did it first, so DC catch up, but I think this is a really interesting way to do it. And I also like the fact that with this movie, it feels like DC is really setting like a firm foundation, and I don't know exactly what the foundation is, of saying like, we're not necessarily going to follow in Marvel's version of having the same actor play the same character across movies and shows, like really only letting that change if contracts expire and going into a different format like animation. But DC is really saying like, we have all of these actors and character lore and adaptations of different characters that like, we're really going to capitalize on that in a way that Marvel is not able to, because that's not been Marvel's structure. And that's so smart. Like, my personal problem with DC all along has just been that I feel like in certain ways they haven't found a way to do their own thing and really use their assets in characters and intellectual property that meshes together. And I think if Marvel's gonna do the really sound, like having these characters have through lines across different movies, phases, and other things, but I personally really think that DC going in an opposite direction is going to be really good for them. So I'm excited to see what The Flash has to bring. And last, of course, one of the biggest things out of yesterday was the Batman trailer. Visually, it looks great. I am really excited to see more of the darker Batman. I just feel like Ben Affleck wasn't able to like sell that to me of Bruce Wayne's like tortured past. He doesn't feel like Batman to me. And so I'm really excited to see Pattinson in that role. Of course, Zoe Kravitz as Catwoman, but the thing I think I'm most excited to see is the Riddler, because I feel like the Riddler is a character who could be very menacing, that's kind of just been, neglected because the Joker is so iconic within DC's, cinematic iterations of things. And I am so excited to see the Riddler in this movie playing a very sinister version of the character, because I'm only really familiar with Frank Gorshin's rendition of the Riddler from the 1960s, and so I'm very much excited to see a new take on that character. So overall, from a Marvel fan's perspective, I think DC is finally heading in the right direction, and it honestly has me really excited for their future, because I obviously will go see these movies and, try to engage in the dialogue with them. I just personally haven't always found the most connection with DC's characters, and I think that's perfectly okay, because I'm sure there's people on the DC side that feel that way about Marvel. But I absolutely can't wait to see what the reception from DC fans is of all of these future projects, as well as kind of see if DC really does commit to this darker, not family-friendly side of superheroes. And I'm not saying they're bad guys like the boys, I just mean not focusing on appealing to that oh, we want families to come to this, but more so be like we're exploring this really interesting take on a superhero. That's what I mean. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked it and want to hear more kind of takes from a Marvel perspective on DC stuff, be sure to like this video. Comment down below what you're most excited for from what you saw at DC Fandome. I know there's a lot of other stuff video game wise. I know there was an Aquaman reveal and a Wonder Woman announcement, but these were the biggest things that I kind of wanted to touch on. Thank you all so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a video from me, and I will see you all in my very next video. Bye, y'all.